I apologize for not reading the entire gospel passage appointed. To recap, the Pharisees get annoyed because this happened on the Sabbath. A lot of name-calling ensues. They triangulate the man's parents, and then they ultimately kick the man who had been blind but now sees out of the synagogue. And then the two meet again, Jesus and this man, and a lovely encounter where Jesus talks about seeing as equivalent, the ability to see Jesus as being the Son of Man as essential. I really want to focus in on that healing. The thing that really stands out to me is the parallelism, the echo, that in this healing, it evokes the creation of Adam. It says in Genesis that God formed Adam out of the dust of the earth and then breathed the breath of life into his nostrils. Here we have Jesus making clay and putting it on this man's eyes in a way that seems as if this creation of Adam is continuing, or maybe even brought to its fullness. It's interesting to me to know that the Hebrew word for Adam is derived, or Adam is derived from the Hebrew word for soil, for dirt, Adamah. And so sometimes on Ash Wednesday, as the priest, as I would be making the mark of the cross with ashes on someone's forehead, it feels appropriate to say, "You are Adam, and to Adamah you shall return. You are dust, and to dust you shall return." But yet it is from the dust that we are created. I think of the bumper sticker from years ago that says, "God is not finished with me yet," when I see this passage, thinking that maybe all of us are that person that Jesus encounters. When I was an undergraduate at the University of Minnesota almost 50 years ago, I had the opportunity to hear a lecture by the Oxford theologian John Macquarie. I was really touched by that. In fact, I still have his autographed Principles of Christian Theology in my library as a treasure. One of the things, though, that Macquarie helped me to see is this notion of God is not finished with me yet. God is continually at work in us, bringing us into a fuller reality, a fuller creation. In his book, he talks about that though we may speak of original sin, we must also be thinking about original righteousness. Because when we were created in the image of God, that goodness, that is the essence of the image of God, did not fully depart from us. It is part of each of us. It is part of all creation right now. But it is yet in a process of becoming, of being realized, something that represents a deep longing within us. And so this man, born blind, being touched, anointed by Jesus, is standing in, I think, for me, for all of us, as God is making us more full and then more able to see God in our midst. This passage also calls to mind that this process of a work by Oliver Sacks. Perhaps you recall a wonderful scientist, a writer about the phenomenon of what happens in people's minds as perceptions are changed or altered. In his book, An Anthropologist on Mars, he talks about the case of Cheryl Jennings, a person who was born blind and who underwent a surgery later in his life and was given the capacity to see. And he found it actually quite disturbing, quite unsettling to have this ability now presented to him. He goes on to say that, this is Sachs says regarding this phenomenon, in the newly sighted, learning to see demands a radical change in neurological functioning, and with it, a radical change in psychological functioning, in self, in identity. The change may be experienced literally, in literally life and death terms. One must die as a blind person and be born again as a seeing person. In blindness, a deep adaptation or orientation occurs in which one constitutes or appropriates the world in non-visual terms. It then becomes a different condition, a different form of being that Sachs calls deep blindness. How might we be in a deep blindness? And what is it that God might do in order for us to see? And what must we die to, let go of, in order for us to see as God would intend for us to see? That, my friends, I think really is the work of Lent, what we're about. What do we need to shed in order to see as God would have us to see? I'm not going to be with you on Easter, so I'll give you a prelude of what I would say were I with you on Easter, and that is that the Celtic saints had this notion of resurrection eyes, the ability to see the risen Lord. You recall perhaps how Mary Magdalene confused this figure that she saw in the garden as she went to the tomb to anoint the body of Jesus. It says that she thought him to be the gardener. But then Jesus spoke her name, and in that she saw. That's the Easter gift, and I think that's actually the gift that is happening to this man, this ability to see with resurrection eyes, the new creation that God has. That is everywhere around us, all around. How is it that God might be showering down grace everywhere, all at once, but we are blind? Archbishop Temple, former Archbishop of Canterbury, during World War II, so this is about 80 years ago, spoke of that. He said, every manifestation of the divine word is an illumination of the world, and the manifestation is all around us. But we are blind from birth and pay no heed until Jesus anoints our eyes. In the psalm, we had the words, goodness and mercy shall follow us all the days of our lives. We live in times where we may not necessarily see that or feel that, but that is why we're here now, that Jesus may anoint our eyes, that Jesus may touch us, that through word and sacrament that we might be given this ability to see, first of all, this ability to see Jesus as the Son of Man, Jesus as Messiah, Jesus as our Savior. But also that we might have eyes to see the goodness and mercy that God is pouring out upon us, around us, all the time. And also the ability to see, not as the disciples who looked on this man who had been born blind and thought of shame, thought of sin, thought of a cause. But how do we see each other, even and especially those who are different than ourselves or differently abled than ourselves, to be the full manifestations of God, that God is in them? I want to, this tendency, or a temptation I have is to put a sign over a church door that says, "No shame zone." That this is not a place where we blame or assign shame to one another. But we see, in fact, in each person that original righteousness, that dignity, that grace that God has given to all. Let us take a moment and rejoice in God who comes to open our eyes that enables us to see. Would you repeat these words from Psalm 46? Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am. Be still and know.